Hello and welcome everyone to a new Mendix Expert Developer webinar. My name is Jan de Vries and I will be your host for today. Today's webinar will be about kickstarting your widget development with Node.js, Grunt and other useful tools. JavaScript developer Jelte Lagendijk will teach you how to use the new widget generator, upgrade your existing widgets, and how to check your code for deprecations. During the webinar, you can submit your questions in the question window. After the demos, Jelte will go through some of the questions. The questions and answers will be posted on the webinar page afterwards. Before we start, please take a look at the handouts window in GoToWebinar to find the presentation slides. Please enjoy the presentation. I'll now give the floor to Jelte.
Hi Jan, thank you, and thank you everybody for joining the expert webinar, Kickstart Your Widget Development. My name is Jelte Lagendijk. I am a JavaScript developer for the community team at Mendix. At the community team, we want to enable you as a JavaScript developer to create your own widgets, and we want to enable our community to create content. For this webinar, we expect you to know how a widget works, have technical knowledge about JavaScript, and have a basic understanding what Node.js is. We will not go in depth on how a widget works. In the notes of the slide deck, we provided a link for a how-to for creating your first widget, the Hello World widget. In this webinar, I am focusing on tooling. First, we'll talk about how to scaffold a widget in a minute using our latest tool, the widget generator. Next, we'll discuss Grunt, which is included in our latest tools and widgets repositories. I'll talk about how we can use the tools, namely the widget generator, to update existing widgets. As a bonus, I will show another tool that we built back in November to check your widget when it comes to deprecations in Mendix 6. Last but not least, I'll give a demo demonstrating these tools. We'll go into a step-by-step guide using the widget generator and Grunt. In the slide deck, we added links and further explanations in the notes per slide. The notes in the last slide contains a brief step-by-step guide on the things that we are going to demo. At the community team, we create and maintain a lot of widgets. In order to do this properly, we need development tools. So up until now, we only had Brackets, a code editor, combined with a custom plugin to create widgets. There are a couple of in-depth how-tos that you can find on our website regarding this editor. It has advantages and disadvantages. It's visual and it's easy to use, but there are a few bugs in the plugin that, because of the very little support in Brackets, are hard to fix. Simply put, the plugin not always works as expected, but it's hard to debug and fix it. For example, the plugin will not work if you're not connected to the internet. This led to the creation of a new tool, the Yeoman widget generator. It's faster, it's more reliable, it's better maintainable, it's editor independent, and we've made this tool transparent and open source. The files, you can find them on GitHub. For those of you who do not know what Node.js is, simply put, it's a framework that uses JavaScript to run basically anything on your computer. It has been around for a long time and has a large ecosystem of open source libraries. You might have already used it without knowing it. For example, the previously mentioned Brackets editor is built on top of Node. Yeoman is a command line tool that is built on top of Node.js as well. It's what is called a scaffolding tool. Using a template and by entering a few parameters, it can quickly scaffold a web application, a website, or, in our case, a widget. The widget generator is basically a template that is used by the Yeoman command line client to create a widget. Grunt is a task runner that can be found on gruntjs.com. It is also built on top of Node.js, and it has the ability to run predefined or customly defined tasks. Grunt uses a single file, a gruntfile.js, to run these tasks. It has a few advantages. Mainly, it is independent of any editor you use. You can run this from the command line client. You can run this from the command line, but for a lot of editors, there are also plugins that can use Grunt. Now, our community comes up with new ways to improve development, either through the forum, through GitHub, or meetups. And I actually have to thank one of our MVPs, André Schmidt, for providing the first version of this Grunt file. Using his as an example, we created our own, which is now included in the sources of many of our widgets on GitHub, as well as automatically provided by our widget generator. We have created a few tasks that you can use out of the box to speed up your widget development. In the demo, I will demonstrate the use of Grunt and running the various tasks like build, version, start modeler, and a default task. In the slide deck, you will find a short description per task. Now, the most important task, the default task, will let you develop your widget while running your Mendix application without the necessity to redeploy your application every time you make a change to your JavaScript files in your widget. Now, you might have already built a widget, or for a client, you are customizing one. We have adapted the widget generator to include the necessary files for Grunt in your existing widget repository. So this will give you the ability to quickly use the power of Grunt. There are a few steps that you will need to take. You open your widget folder in the terminal. That can either be a command line client or a PowerShell. You have to make sure that the source files are in a subdirectory called src. You run the widget generator in the terminal. It will ask you if you're updating an existing widget. The widget generator will then create a package.json and a grunt file.js. It will install the necessary dependencies for Grunt, and you can start using it. Now, as a bonus in this webinar, I'll also talk about deprecations. In November last year, we had to make sure our Mendix supported widgets were up to date and compatible with the new Mendix 6 release. There were methods and APIs that were already marked as deprecations in Mendix 5. These would be removed in Mendix 6. If any of the widgets would contain deprecations, they would break your Mendix 6 application due to JavaScript errors. So we created a deprecation checker that is also built on top of Node.js and run as a standalone command line client. With this client, you can quickly check your existing widgets in your project. You run this client in your widgets folder of your project, and it will tell you whether or not any widget has possible deprecations. Now, as said, we use this tool to check any of our own supported widgets. The tool can also export an Excel file for future references. So, enough theory. Let's get down to business and let's demo the tools that I discussed. Okay, first of all, to use these tools, we need Node.js. Node.js can be downloaded from nodejs.org, and we recommend that you install the LTS version, in this case the 4.2.6 version. You can also install the stable version if you want, as long as you make sure that the version is minimally 4.2. Now, once you've installed Node.js, it is available on your command line. And I will show this by opening a PowerShell. I have my PowerShell opened here. You can also use, if you want, the standard command line client in Windows. This one you can open by going to Start, and then in the search bar, type CMD, press Enter, and this will start your command line client. Now, for this demo, I'm going to use a PowerShell. I personally prefer the PowerShell. Okay, so I've installed Node.js, and I can check if it's there by typing node-v, and this will give me a version number. Now, in my case, I have version 4.2.1. You also can check whether or not the Node package manager is there by typing npm-v, and this will give you the version of the Node package manager. Now, these are necessary to install the Yeoman generator. So first, I'll show you the website of Yeoman. Yeoman is on yeoman.io. And this will give you an explanation of what Yeoman does and how it works and how you can install it. Now, if I go to yeoman.io/generators, here I have a list of all the generators. And currently, Yeoman has about 33 or about 3,400 generators. And Mendix has built their own generator as well. So if I type in Mendix, here you'll see a link to the Mendix widget generator. Now, if I click on it, I go to our GitHub page. Now, at the moment, we have not yet provided a how-to on our website. This how-to will be published as soon as this video will be published. For now, I refer to the README page on GitHub. Here you'll see a short explanation on how it works and how you need to install it. And you install this by typing this command in your command line window. So if I go to PowerShell, it would be npm install-g, which means globally. Yo, that's the Yeoman client. Generator-Mendix, that's the Mendix widget generator, and Grunt-Cli, and that's the Grunt client. Now, this can take up to a minute or 2 minutes. I've already installed it, so I don't want you to be looking at a window where it's trying to install. I already have it. So let's use the widget generator. I want to scaffold a new widget. So I create a folder where I want to scaffold this widget. In this case, I have a folder generate a widget, which is empty. So if I go to my PowerShell, here I see a listing, and I go to this folder, and it is empty. So let me clear this. And now I'm going to run the widget generator. I do this by typing yo Mendix, pressing enter. This will start my generator. And this generator is going to ask me for a few parameters. Now, first of all, it asks me what's the name of my widget. Now, let's say I'm going to call this webinar widget. I press enter. I can enter a description. Now what you might see if you open the widget generator is that there is already a value here between brackets. So if I press enter now, it will use the default value. If you open the widget generator and, for example, here you have add a copyright. Now between brackets there is Mendix 2016. For you that would be different. Now that is because I've already used the generator before, and so it will save these values. So I'll just press enter, enter. Here's the initial version, and we always start the widget with version 1.0.0, and this is actually what is called semantic versioning. That means that the first number is the major number, the second number is the minor number, and the third number is a patch number. And we recommend that everybody uses semantic versioning. You will see this in our App Store, you will see this on GitHub, and we recommend that you stick to this version numbering. So I'll press enter again. Again, I've already used this, so the author is already filled in. And I have here my GitHub username. That's not completely functional right now, but you can already set it. So if I press enter now, it will scaffold a new widget. So if here you will see the folder that I'm working in. Right now it's empty. So if I press enter now, what it will do is create all the files. And these files are actually a copy of our App Store widget boilerplate that is on GitHub as well. So this follows the pattern of the App Store widget boilerplate that is also discussed on our website in the documentation. What it also does, here you see it has copied all the files, and now it's installing all the dependencies that are needed for Grunt. When these dependencies are installed, it will automatically run grunt build to build the first version of your widget. And the first version of my widget will be in my dist folder, and it is called the webinar widget. I will show you the tasks that you can run in Grunt later on. Now I also mentioned that you can use the Mendix widget generator to update existing widgets. So if I go to, I have here a folder, and let me go to my folder. Now, as you might see, there is no grunt file here, and there is no package.json here. Now, normally you could manually copy these files, but like I said, we've adapted the generator to create them for you. So let me run the generator again in this folder. So clear this, and I type in Mendix, and I press enter. Now, what will happen is the generator will see that the directory is not empty. And let me maximize this. And it will give you a warning. And if there are already files in your folder. But it will also ask you whether or not you're upgrading a custom widget. And in this case, I am, so I'll press yes. What it will do now is try to read the package.xml in your source folder. So if I go to my source folder. Here is the package.xml, and here is my demo widget.xml. And so it will automatically detect this is the name of your widget. So here I can press enter. And since my widget is of version 1.0.0, it will take this version number as well. So I press enter. And now it will copy a couple of files, but the most important one is a package.json and a grunt file. And as you might see, now it has included the grunt file and the package.json. It will then install all the dependencies, and now you can use Grunt in your existing widget repository. Now let me break out of this. Now it might also happen that you have downloaded a widget. And if you've downloaded a widget, you have a widget from us. So if I go to the Mendix repository and, for example, I take the chart.js widget, if I can clone this using Git, or I can download it as a zip file, and it will include a grunt file and a package.json. So I should be able to use Grunt from this repository. So if I type grunt now, it will give me an error. And that is because Grunt cannot find the local grunt. And that's because the dependencies that are used by Grunt are not yet installed. So I need to install these. And I do this by typing npm install. And if I press enter, it will install the dependencies. That's because it has a package.json, and so the node package manager will understand which dependencies to install. So if I open, I will open this in my editor. And so in my editor, here you will see the package.json, and in here are the dependencies that are used by Grunt to run their tasks. So that concludes using the widget generator. And so now let's use Grunt. So for this, I'm going to actually use one of our widgets that we've built, the chart.js widget. In here, I have a grunt file, I have a package.json, and my dependencies are already installed because I have a node modules folder. So let's go to my PowerShell. And I go to chart.js. Now from here, I can run my grunt tasks. And so first, let's build a new MPK file, a widget file. So here's my MPK file, and now I'm going to run grunt build. Now, what grunt build will do is take all the files in your source folder here and create an archive, a zip archive with an MPK extension, and it will put this MPK file in the dist folder. And as you can see by the timestamp, I just created this MPK file. So that's how you use the grunt build tool. And this MPK you can distribute in the App Store, or you can use it in your projects. Now, if I'm updating the code in my widget, I need to do some versioning. So every time I create a new version of my widget, I need to update the version number. Now, if I go to, let me go to my editor. In my source folder, I have a package .xml here, and here is a version number. And currently the version is 3.1.3. Now, if I want to update my version number, I could change this myself, but we have created a Grunt task for this. So if I run Grunt version, it will try to read the package.xml and the version number in package.xml. And in this case, it's 3.1.3. So if I want to update my version number, for example, I want version 3.2, I can set this using Grunt version. So I say Grunt version 3.2.0 because it is semantic versioning. The patch number here, if I say it's version 3.2, it's actually 3.2.0. And so now I press enter. And if I go back to my editor, you will see that in the package.xml, the version number has changed to 3.2.0. So that's a fast way to change the version number of your widget. It will also update the version number in your package.json, and we try to keep these two aligned, but this version number is not used in the App Store or anywhere. It's just for convenience that we also change it here in the package.json. When we develop a widget, we always add a test project. And usually, if you're looking at our widgets, at our structure, you have in your widget repository, you have a folder called test. And in test, here is my test project. Now I can run this test project just by clicking on it, but we also included a Grunt task for that. So I can run this by typing grunt start dash modeler. Now what it will do is search for your Mendix version selector and taking the test project and opening it with the version selector. So right now from the command line, I've started my test project. Now let's do some development on the widget. So right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this project locally. And in the meantime, in the source folder, I'm going to update one of my files, in this case core.js, and I will uncomment this line. Now, if I open my test project locally and I open my Chrome inspector by right-clicking and then go to inspect, in the tab sources, I can look at all the sources of the files that are loaded. And in this case, it has loaded the chart.js files. And in this case, I want to look at the core.js file. Now, if I look at the core.js file, you'll see that this line is commented, but I just uncommented here. Let me save it again. and reload, it's still commented. That's because the modeler will take all the widget files and unpack them in the deployment folder. So if I go into my project and I go to my test project folder, to deployment, then to web, then to widgets, here you will see the files of, in this case, the chart.js widget. And so if I go to core here, you'll see that it's commented. Now, if I want to do widget development, it's useful to change files in your source folder and see these changes reflected directly in your project. So that's why we created the default task for Grunt. And I run the default task, I can say Grunt default. But if I omit a task name, I can just say Grunt, run Grunt. So I press enter. And this will run the watch task. Now what watch will do, the watch task will do is watch your source folder. So let me go back to my source folder. Here I have my core.js file. It will watch for any changes in these files. And when one of those changes happens, and let me do this by, say, triple commenting here, for example, and I press save, now you'll see that Grunt detects a change, in this case in core.js. Now it will actually run two tasks. It will compress all the files in the source folder, and it will basically build a new MPK file. So this is similar to the Grunt build task, but it will also do something else. It will copy the changed file to your deployment folder. So in this case, here I have core.js open in my source file, and just as I saw that the core.js file in my deployment folder was not changed, if I go to my core.js file here, you'll see that it now has triple comments. And so here, if I reload the page, now I already had sources open, so, and the core.js file open, and now you'll see that it's triple commented. Basically, what this means is that all the changes I make in my source folder are now also reflected in my deployment folder. And so when I'm developing this widget and I make changes to the JavaScript files, I do not have to redeploy my project or synchronize my project directory, as you can see as you have in the modeler, and what was also done when developing in brackets. Now I emphasize on changes in your JavaScript, because when you're changing files, for example, in this case, the package.xml, or let's take, for example, the bar chart here. This XML is loaded by the modeler. Now, if I make changes here, for example, we create a new property. So for demo purposes, I will just copy this, and I'll say the key is size, caption size. Now, if I save this, my Grunt will also see this change. It will create a new MPK file, but if I go to my modeler, and in this case go to the bar chart, I will not see this key here yet. And that's because it now needs to reload the MPK file. So in this case, if I make changes to my XML file or CSS, because that also needs a reload from the modeler, I now need to synchronize my project directory. And if I do that, you'll see that it has added a couple of errors. And that's because the definition of the widget, in this case, the bar chart, is changed. So if I click on the error, what I need to do is update this widget. So I right click and I say update all widgets. And now if I double click on the bar chart, now you'll see that it has added a key. So that is something that you need to keep in mind when you're developing your widget, that if you make changes to either your CSS file or an XML file, then you need to synchronize your project directory. But while running this Grunt task, it will always have the latest version of the MPK file in your test project, because I said that Grunt, when Grunt build runs, it will create an MPK file and puts it in the dist folder, but it will also make a copy of this in your test project, in this case in my test folder and then widgets. And so this MPK file is also the latest version of your widget. Now, I also promised a bonus, and that is the deprecation checker. So let me break out of this. If you want to stop Grunt, in this case the standard Grunt watch task, you can break out of it by pressing Ctrl+C and then press yes, and now I have stopped Grunt. So like I said, we created a deprecation checker, and this can be found on GitHub as well under Mendix, so github.com/Mendix. And if I type in deprecation, it will show me the mx-check-deprecations. Now, this will give you a short description on how to install it. And this is similar of installing your widget generator or Yeoman. In this case, we install the deprecation checker by running npm install mx-check-deprecations-g, which means globally, so you can use it everywhere in your terminal. So now I've already installed it. So if I run mx-check deprecations -h, which means help, it will show me the deprecation checker with a short description of the options that you can give. So let me go to a project where I want to check whether or not a widget has deprecations that will break in Mendix 6. So I go to the folder. I created a test project in the folder deprecations for demo purposes. And so in this folder, if I go to deprecations, this is a standard project folder. And in my widgets folder, I have a couple of widgets. And now I want to check these widgets using the deprecation checker to see if there are any deprecations. So I go to widgets, and now here I run mx-check deprecations. Now what it will do is run through every widget. So as you can see here, it runs through bootstrap rte.mpk, which is here. And it will check for any deprecations. And in this case, it hasn't found any deprecations. The same for the calendar widget, the same for the chart.js widget. And here I have deprecations in my microflow label.mpk. Now what it will tell you is what kind of deprecation do I have in on which JavaScript file, in this case the microflow label.js, in the MPK file. It will tell me what the deprecation is. It will tell me on what line it is, in what column it is, and it will tell me what the match. And this is basically a short snippet of the deprecation. And that's because the deprecation checker will tell you about possible deprecations. So if I go to, for example, here is a deprecation. It says deprecation is mxui.html.setContent. But this is set contents, and this is clearly a method in the widget, and so this is actually a false positive. So the deprecation checker just checks for deprecations, but it will not tell you whether or not it is really a deprecation, because it might be a false positive. Now, of course, this will create a list in your terminal, and that might not be very convenient. So if I run this again, but now by using -e, it will do the same thing, but it will create a deprecations.xls file. And this is basically an Excel file where all the deprecations are listed, and so you can check them for later references. And that concludes my demo. Jan.
Great, thank you very much for that, Jelte. Great explanation and awesome demos. It's now time for some questions. You can ask questions through the questions window in GoToWebinar. During the webinar, we've already received some great questions, so let's go through some of them. The first question is by Amer, and his question is Yeoman better than brackets, and what would you recommend? I think we've seen some of it during your demos, but I'd love to hear your answer on this.
Yeah, great question. Thank you. What is better? The brackets editor, in our opinion, is not well supported, and the plugin that we created is, as I said earlier, is difficult to maintain. We have the code of this plugin on GitHub as well, but it's very hard to maintain. And so we thought, let's create a better tool, and in this case it's the Yeoman widget generator. So which one is best? I think it's Yeoman, but brackets is more visual. So yeah, I think that would be my short explanation.
Great. Ahmed, does that answer your question? Can you now make a decision on what you prefer? Because I think that's what it comes down to. It's not specifically that one is better than the other, but more of what you prefer to use. Michael asked a question. Hi guys, is it possible to get a recorded version of the webinar at some later time? And yes, every expert webinar is recorded and posted on the developer website, developer.mendix.com. And we also post the slides with the notes along with the questions and answers. So you can see and read everything afterwards. Javen Berry asks a question, is there a plan to make this into a GUI instead of a command line?
Not right now. There might be possibilities to create a GUI. Right now, there isn't a plan on doing that, and basically the Yeoman client is always a terminal a client, so a command line client. And I have to check because, for instance, for Grunt, there are a couple of plugins for a lot of editors. In my case, I use Atom a lot, So for Atom, there is a Grunt plugin. And maybe, but that's something I have to check, maybe there's a plugin for using Yeoman from your generator, and then, from using Yeoman in your editor. And so then you don't need the command line client anymore. But that's something I have to check. So maybe.
All right, thanks. Mohammed asked a question, is there a webinar to show how to build a widget from scratch? Well, actually, we've hosted another webinar exactly 1 year ago, also in February, which was hosted by Gerard Edens about creating custom widgets. And it also includes a basic webinar on how to create your first Hello World widget. And we've also got some how-tos on that in the Mendix documentation. So if you go to world.mendix.com, you'll find that in the how-to section. Ivana asks, suppose you want to develop a new widget, on what version of Mendix can you best start if you would also want to support the current Mendix customer base?
If you want to develop a widget, I would recommend that you start on Mendix 5.18. And that's because when you, for example, you would want to use this widget in Mendix 6, if you want to update it to Mendix 6, it's more convenient to start at Mendix 5.18. That would be my recommendation.
All right, thank you. So not necessarily the latest version, not 6.2, but 5.18 plus, so to speak.
Yeah, 5 would be 5 would be. No, 5 is used the most. So yeah, I think it's best to start at, for example, 5.18, something like that.
Yeah, so there's more support for it and more people using it. Yeah. All right, so the next question is by Amer. So he wants to know how you can become an expert widget developer in a short time. So do we have any suggestions for how you can, quickly ramp up widget development? Is there something specific you can do for Mendix, or maybe a crash course online somewhere?
We have a couple of how-tos on the Mendix developer website, which will tell you how to create a widget. But it will also tell you how a widget is structured. So what's the for example, the folder structure and things like that. And Jan also mentioned the other webinar from last year that also goes into creating, I think it was a Hello World widget. And so that would be a quick way to start. And I think the other way to learn this is by experimenting. So just by developing, and if you make, for example, an error, I mean, that's something that you learn from. So you learn also by, I would say, trial and error. So I think that yeah, plus, well, the how-tos and the other webinar, I think that would be a quick way to start your widget development.
Great, thank you very much. Ahmed, does that answer your question? I think it comes down to practicing a lot, finding a good idea, and just trying it out. And if you have someone around you, maybe a colleague or a JavaScript expert who's maybe built widgets before, maybe they can assist you and give you some pointers, give you some tips. And otherwise, of course, there's the Mendix forum where you can always ask your questions and guaranteed answers.
Yeah, and I think there's also something else. I mean, we have a lot of our widgets, we have them on GitHub. So that's also a quick way to try to find out what the structure is. Take the how-tos and then take one of our existing widgets on GitHub and try to look at the code and try to understand how it's structured. And I think that, that helped me when I started as a JavaScript developer at Mendix. That helped me tremendously just by looking at the code of existing widgets as well. And then it goes pretty fast. And yeah, the forum is a good one as well. Yes.
All right, thank you very much. So Jelle Decker asks a question. He says, would this work as a Yeoman GUI for Mendix? And he links to an Atom package called Atom Yeoman. And perhaps you can open that on your UI so that we can all see what he means. So that would be atom.io/packages/atom-yeoman. And perhaps, that's something we have to look into. And perhaps Jelte can already tell us now if this is looking good or maybe something for the future.
Well, thank you. No, I didn't see this one, but I'll be sure to look into it. If it works, then I'm going to experiment with it, and if it works, then I would greatly recommend it. Yes, thank you.
Excellent. So thank you very much for the suggestion. Gonzo Hartwich is asking, if you want to adapt an existing widget that has no Node.js and JSON with Grunt, for example, one you download it from the App Store, how do you start and install Grunt? So I think that's, I think you show that as part of the updating a widget, but perhaps we can quickly go through that. So through the main steps.
Yeah, of course. Now, if you, if you've downloaded a widget, then you won't have the grunt file and the package.json here. And so you can install these using the widget generator. So like I already showed, if I go to now, suppose I don't have a grunt file and a package.json, I can just run Mendix from here, and it will see that the folder is not empty, and it will ask you if you're upgrading the widget. By pressing yes, it will take the name of the widget and the version number of the widget, and then it will try to, it will put package.json and the grunt file there. So that's that. But if you have downloaded a widget, here's the thing: a widget has a .mpk extension, but basically this is a zip archive. So if I rename this to .zip and I change it, now I have a zip folder. And if I open this, there you go. So you can unpack this, these files into a .src folder, and then run your widget generator in your root folder, and there you have it. Then you can start developing or editing an existing widget that you downloaded from the App Store.
All right, perfect. Thank you very much for the answer. Do we have any more questions? If not, we will be rounding up. And all the questions and answers will be posted on the website afterwards. And we'll be sure to post that on Twitter and on the Mendix forum. So that concludes the webinar for today. Thank you all very much for attending. And don't forget to fill out the survey afterwards. See you at the next webinar.